Hey y'all, just a few things for today. So first, don't forget that your peer critique a peer assignment is due today, tonight before 11:59 p.m. So make sure you get that done. Again, thank y'all to those of you who've been staying on top of your assignments, and to those of you who need help or extra time, please, please, please let me know. I forgot about a slide yesterday, so we're gonna cover that, and then I'm gonna go over one more slide with y'all, and then y'all are gonna have an assignment, and that's all we'll do for today. So we learned about yesterday different communication barriers that y'all might encounter. We talked about message related barriers, we talked about internal barriers, and we talked about external barriers. Message related barriers, the problem is with the message itself. So maybe the language is too complicated, or maybe the delivery isn't really supporting the message, or maybe you didn't tailor the message to the audience. So that's going to be the problem with communication. Or maybe the problem is internal. Maybe the audience is kind of the problem. Maybe they can't listen because they're tired or they're distracted or they're not interested. And so you got to make sure you use delivery really effectively and again, tailor that message to them so they might have a little more motivation to listen. And lastly, we had external barriers, which is just anything with the environment that's going to be a problem. So maybe it's really uncomfortable, it's really hot or cold, or maybe there's just a lot of loud noise, or maybe you're having technical difficulties. Now, for any of these, sometimes it might become so much of a barrier that you need to acknowledge it to your audience. So maybe if people aren't listening, or maybe if the room is really hot and like you're all aware of it, to acknowledge a distraction to your audience, you want to do so without drawing more attention to it than is necessary. Then you're going to draw the audience's attention back to the presentation. Now, you need both of these together because if you just draw attention to the distraction, you might create more of a distraction than initially was there. So you make sure that you draw attention to it, say, hey, I know that we're all kind of distracted by this, but let's focus back on the presentation because I worked hard on this message and I think y'all will all really benefit from it. So if you only say, like, man, it's really hot in here, isn't it? Then you might spark a conversation with people being like, yeah, it's so hot, man. It reminds me of the summer of 93. It was so hot and I hated it. And you don't want to do that. So you want to make sure you draw it back to the presentation because that's like the whole point of you being there. So for example, even if like the distraction is like you don't feel good and you're like, man, like I might throw up. I'm so nervous, or I don't feel good. I'm sick. Like I gotta let them know I might throw up. Okay, even you can do something like that in a not like super gross and distracting way. So like if you just say like, hey guys, if I throw up at some point during this presentation, just disregard it. It's gonna be fine. Like, no, that's so gross. Like all I'm gonna think about now is you throwing up. Even think about when we do Movie Monday, we talked about the Princess Diary speech, and she was like, "Oh, I'm not usually a good public speaker. Sometimes I get nervous, or I faint, or even throw up." And then everyone's like, "Huh!" I'm like, "Yeah, obviously they were kind of thrown off by that." And so instead, what you would want to say is like, "Hey, you guys, I just want to let y'all know that I don't feel super well, but this message is really good, and I'm really excited to share it with y'all. So I hope that we can stay focused on the message." So it points out the distraction in a unobtrusive way, and then again draws the attention back to the message, which is the most important part, because the message is the most important part. So if you ever have to acknowledge any kind of communication barrier, just make sure that, yeah, like point it out if necessary. If you're the only one distracted by it, maybe just deal with it. Unless like you're visibly distracted and your audience might think you're insane, then be like, hey, sorry if I seem a little off. Like I was distracted by this thing, but I'm gonna focus. Let's get back on track. So, but if you're all distracted by it, again, draw attention and then draw attention back to the presentation. What we're gonna learn about today is something called logical fallacies. This is gonna be, I don't know why I hit escape. So when we learn about our communication barriers, this is going to be a message related barrier because the problem is within the message itself and how your arguments are created. So a logical fallacy is an error in reasoning that renders an argument invalid. So the way that you're trying to create a connection between two ideas, the reasoning wasn't quite strong enough, and so your argument kind of falls apart. So message related because the problem is with the message. Now, what I'm going to do is there's a chart or a document on Google Classroom called Logical Fallacies Chart. And on the left side of it, there's a list of all these names of different logical fallacies. Then on the right side it has 2 examples for each one. And in the middle, it's blank because you're going to have to try and come to a conclusion about what the error in reasoning is. I'm sorry, usually we do this as a group with your table, but since we are not in school, we don't have that opportunity. So you're going to do it on your own. But really, like, it's more for like, I don't know. I don't know how I want to say this. It's okay if you get some of them wrong because, like, they're kind of tricky to figure out what the error is when you're looking at the examples because logical fallacies are hard to identify. Because, like, you see it and you're like, okay, yeah, like, that kind of makes sense. And that's the whole point. It's like, yeah, I guess if you think about it that way, it makes sense. But, like, the logic isn't quite strong enough to really support it. Um, and so I don't want y'all to do any research on these. I don't want y'all to look through your notes to see, oh, well, that's what the logical fallacy is. Like, I want you to try and do the chart on your own without looking further in your notes. I think that'll be the best way to do it is to try and figure out those conclusions on your own, figure out what the error in reasoning is, and then we'll go through and discuss what they all mean. Um, so yeah, that's all you have to do. That'll be due on Monday before 11:59 p.m. You'll just go through that chart and try and figure out what the error in reasoning is based on the name of the error and then the 2 examples that are provided. And that's it. Y'all have a good weekend.